4:47 a.m. Yokosuka Naval Base, Japan, June 4th, 2026. 12 unmarked vehicles moved in near silence down the main service road of the Yokosuka Ship Repair Facility, headlights cut to parking position. They spread across the dock perimeter in a pattern rehearsed over 2 full nights at a training compound outside Honolulu. 4 vehicles per warehouse cluster, staggered 30 seconds apart to prevent alert propagation between breach points. No radio traffic. Text-only coordination on encrypted channels compartmented from base communications infrastructure since the operation opened 8 months prior. At the same moment, 3 more vehicles were moving through residential neighborhoods 4 blocks from the main gate. Agents in civilian clothes, unmarked sedans. 2 addresses were officer housing units inside the base perimeter. The third was a rented apartment in a 6-story residential building near the Yokosuka Industrial District. The lease traced back to a civilian logistics holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The operation had a hard window. 41 minutes before the base personnel shift change would introduce uncontrolled foot traffic across the dock complex and make a quiet breach impossible. 12 warehouses, 3 residences, 15 simultaneous entry points, 41 federal agents, 6 FBI tactical support personnel, 12 NCIS investigators, and 22 names on the arrest warrants. The joint NCIS and FBI tactical teams had spent 68 days preparing for this morning. Rehearsals, floor plan walkthroughs from architectural records obtained through a classified facility assessment request filed under a separate case designator to prevent internal leakage. Timing drills, equipment checks. They ran the full breach sequence 59 times before anyone set foot on the base. Behind those warehouse bays, stacked between false utility walls, hidden beneath industrial shelving, sealed inside decommissioned equipment crates, the facility manifest listed as awaiting disposal was the largest internal Navy supply chain theft since the Walker spy ring of 1985. 41 years between incidents. The second one was bigger. The searchlights came on at 4:51 a.m. Agents moved. 8 months earlier, this operation did not exist. No wiretaps, no surveillance teams, no sealed warrants, no task force, no case designation. There was only a spreadsheet, a junior Navy comptroller working an October Tuesday afternoon, and a number that did not add up. Specialist First Class Dana Herrick was 29 years old. A logistics analyst assigned to the Defense Finance and Accounting Service Office at Yokosuka, the branch responsible for reconciling fleet maintenance expenditures against physical installation records across the 7th Fleet's Pacific repair rotation. She held that position for 3 years. The work was methodical and administrative. She reviewed invoices, she checked serial numbers, she filed anomaly reports when documentation didn't match. On October 14th, 2025, Herrick was cross-referencing the maintenance billing package for the guided missile destroyer USS Howard against its certified installation records from the most recent dry dock inspection. Total invoice value, $19.7 million. Standard for a destroyer maintenance cycle, within the expected cost range for a Yokosuka-based DDG-class vessel coming out of a full systems check. She began matching invoice line items to installation certificates. One component appeared twice, a N/SPY-1-D Aegis radar subassembly, model designation Whiskey-Kilo-4, serial number Delta-3-7-1-4, catalog value $1.2 million. The September 2025 invoice listed this unit as installed on the USS Howard's portside sensor array during the most recent maintenance period. The physical installation certificate, signed by Petty Officer 2nd Class Robert Altman, a certified naval systems technician, listed the same unit, same serial number, same installation location as having been installed in July 2025. 2 months earlier, 2 separate installation records, same hardware unit, same slot. 2 months apart, no removal record between them. This was physically impossible. A radar subassembly cannot be removed and reinstalled in the same location without generating a mandatory removal certificate. No removal certificate existed. According to the official documentation, the component had been installed twice without ever being uninstalled. Herrick flagged it, filed a standard anomaly report through the DFAS internal reporting system. Then, because something about it didn't sit right, she ran the serial number through the Defense Logistics Agency's Central Parts Tracking database. The query returned no result. A $1.2 million naval radar module with no entry anywhere in the federal parts tracking system. No purchase registration, no transfer history, no chain of custody documentation, no receiving entry from any defense contractor. As far as the DLA's National Inventory System was concerned, serial number Delta 3714 had never been ordered, never been manufactured for the U.S. government, never been delivered, and did not exist in any official record. She ran a second serial number from the same invoice package. No result. A third. No result. 3 hours later, Herrick had pulled 11 separate component entries from the USS Howard's maintenance invoice that returned no DLA registration. Combined catalog value, $8.9 million. Hardware worth nearly $9 million listed on a U.S. Navy billing document that could not be traced to any federal procurement record in existence. At 2:47 p.m. on October 14, 2025, Herrick picked up her desk phone and called the NCIS field office at Yokosuka Naval Base. NCIS Special Agent Lillian Park took the referral call personally. Park had spent 9 years in defense contractor fraud investigations before rotating to counterintelligence work in the Pacific. She understood federal procurement at a technical level that went beyond most investigators in her field. She understood ghost invoicing, parallel billing architectures, and the specific access control vulnerabilities in DoD supply chain accounting that fraud operators relied on to stay invisible. What Herrick had described was not a clerical error. Park drove to the DFAS office within 40 minutes. She reviewed Herrick's documentation. Then she asked to see the full invoice package, not just the flag line items. They worked through the entire $19.7 million maintenance billing package together, line by line, 2 hours and 20 minutes. By the time they finished, the number of unregistered component entries had grown from 11 to 16. Combined value, $11.3 million in parts on a single Navy destroyer invoice that could not be tied to any legitimate procurement event in the federal system. Park called her supervisor from the parking lot. The following morning, without filing a formal case initiation request that would have generated a visible entry in the NCIS case management system accessible to base command personnel, Park and 2 colleagues she trusted from a prior assignment in Guam began pulling maintenance invoicing records for every destroyer in the 7th Fleet's active repair rotation at Yokosuka. They used existing data access permissions, which were legitimately held for audit support functions, and kept their queries within parameters that would not generate system flags or automatic notifications. What they found over the following 12 days expanded the problem by an order of magnitude. Across 11 months of destroyer maintenance billing records spanning 6 vessels, the team identified 47 separate instances of the duplicate serial number pattern. Different ships, different maintenance cycles, different component categories, Aegis radar assemblies, missile guidance firmware processors, turbine diagnostic management systems, classified shipboard communications, encryption hardware. Each instance followed the same structure. A component listed on a billing invoice with a serial number that existed nowhere in DLA's national tracking database. 47 instances, $17.3 million in unregistered components across 11 months, and every single authorization signature traced back to one officer. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, 38 years old, Naval Supply Corps. Assigned to the Yokosuka Ship Repair Facility as Senior Parts Requisition Officer for the Pacific Destroyer Rotation Program. 12-year career, 2 meritorious service citations. Performance evaluations marked outstanding across 3 consecutive review cycles. security clearance at top secret SCI level. No disciplinary record of any kind. Webb's position gave him final sign-off authority on all parts requisitions above $250,000 for vessels in the Yokosuka repair cycle. By institutional structure, his authorization signature was the highest level of oversight over every major parts transaction at the facility. Park submitted a restricted access financial background request on Webb through the National Counterintelligence and Security Center under a protocol that blocked notification at the base command level. The results returned in 9 days. Over a 31-month period, Marcus Webb had made 73 cash deposits distributed across accounts at 6 financial institutions in 3 countries: a domestic bank in Virginia, a commercial bank in Singapore, a financial cooperative in the Philippines registered to a business entity with a 2-year operational history and no visible commercial activity beyond account maintenance. Total combined value, $4.2 million. The deposits range between $42,000 and $260,000 per transaction. No single deposit exceeded the mandatory federal reporting threshold. Each amount fell within ranges associated with deliberate structuring to evade suspicious activity report requirements. And every deposit landed within a window of 3 to 7 days following a high-value parts requisition authorization signed by Marcus Webb. 73 deposits, 73 authorization events. Identical timing window across 31 consecutive months. That was not coincidence. That was a payment schedule. Park went up the chain. NCIS Pacific Region, NCIS Headquarters at Quantico, FBI Counterintelligence Division, Department of Justice National Security Division. Operation Hollow Keel formally opened on November 3, 2025. I spent a long time reading through the publicly available court documents on this case. One detail kept coming back. Marcus Webb had been operating in his role at Yokosuka for 5 years. During that time, 3 different commanding officers had rotated through the Yokosuka Ship Repair Facility. 3 separate command structures, 3 independent inspection cycles, 3 complete chains of authority above Webb's position. Not one of them had flagged his invoicing patterns. Not one audit had returned a finding sufficient to trigger external review. The DLA cross-reference check that Herrick had performed, the one that identified 11 unregistered parts within 2 hours, was technically available to any authorized user with DLA database access. The facility had authorized users. Nobody had been running that check systematically against maintenance invoices. 5 years, 3 command rotations, 0 flags. The scheme had not just survived institutional oversight, it had been structurally invisible to it. The mechanics of what Webb constructed required understanding how naval parts procurement actually works at a facility level. When a destroyer arrives at Yokosuka for scheduled maintenance, the ship's supply department submits a repair requisition to the base facility's parts requisition office. That office identifies required components, issues purchase orders to authorized defense contractors, receives and logs incoming parts into the DLA tracking system, and certifies installation completion. Webb's office was that office. Webb controlled the purchase order process. Webb controlled what entered the DLA tracking system and what did not. He was the single human checkpoint between physical parts arriving at the facility and those parts appearing in any federal record. The ghost billing layer operated as follows. Webb would submit a legitimate purchase order for a high-value component. A defense contractor would ship the unit. Webb's office would log receipt and installation. All documentation would be created correctly for the real transaction. The part was real. The installation was real. The billing invoice was submitted to DFAS and paid as routine. That same invoice, however, would also contain a second line item for the identical component type, a slightly modified serial number referencing a unit that had never been ordered, never been received, and did not appear in any tracking system because Webb had never created an entry for it. This phantom entry generated a second payment. The payment moved through an authorized contractor billing cost center account, where Webb held co-signature authority, then through a series of intermediary transfers spanning 3 banking jurisdictions, before landing in his deposit network. Real part. Real installation. Real invoice for the real part, plus a parallel entry charging the Navy a second time for a unit that did not exist anywhere except on paper. Across 5 years, that mechanism had generated $31.4 million in fraudulent billing payments. But the billing fraud was only one half of the operation. The physical diversion was the other half. When a defense contractor shipped a consignment of, for example, 10 Aegis sub-assemblies to Yokosuka, Webb's office would log 9 into the DLA system. The 10th would be physically rerouted before it reached the facility floor. A warehouse foreman on Webb's payroll would redirect the unit, logged internally as a temporary administrative hold, to a secondary commercial warehouse leased through a civilian logistics firm 8 kilometers from the naval base in the Yokosuka Industrial District. The leasing entity traced back through 2 corporate layers to a holding company registered in Singapore. The diverted units were cataloged at the secondary warehouse, photographed, condition rated, assigned lot numbers. After an accumulation period of typically 6 to 8 weeks, they were listed in what NCIS investigators, when they eventually accessed the system, described in their after-action documentation as a commercially sophisticated parallel inventory management platform. Searchable by component type, classification level, condition rating, and available quantity. Professionally designed, regularly updated, the platform ran on encrypted servers hosted through a provider in Singapore. Access required a cryptographic key issued to vetted buyers through a separate authentication channel. Transactions were conducted through a private Darknet market accessible via a specific onion address distributed through an invitation-only contact network. The buyer pool was concentrated in Southeast Asia. Shell companies and acquisition fronts registered in Malaysia, South Korea, Thailand, and the Philippines. Some had legitimate business histories as regional electronics distributors, cover that explained component purchases, and provided import documentation frameworks. Others had been incorporated solely for acquisition purposes, with no operational history outside these transactions. What they were purchasing: Aegis radar processing subassemblies, missile guidance system firmware modules, turbine management electronics, shipboard communications encryption hardware. None of it was commercially available. All of it was U.S. defense-grade material. Several recovered categories were marked confidential. 2 categories referenced only in redacted form in all public filings carried classification designations above confidential. This was not opportunistic theft. This was a systematized defense hardware brokerage. And it had apparently been operating continuously since at least 2021. What's striking about this case, stepping back from the charges themselves, is the integration. Most defense fraud schemes run a single mechanism, either financial manipulation or physical diversion. Rarely both simultaneously, with an organized resale infrastructure on top. Webb had constructed a 3-layer value extraction system: fraudulent billing generating $31.4 million, physical diversion generating an estimated $65 million in hardware at catalog value, and a Darknet resale operation converting diverted hardware into untraceable cash. All 3 layers operating in parallel for 5 years, out of the same office. That doesn't build overnight, and it doesn't run without people helping. By December 2025, the Operation Hollow Keel Task Force had enough documented financial evidence to charge Webb with the billing fraud alone. They did not move. Park made the case for extending the investigation. The network had more members. The buyer pool had not been fully mapped. The communications infrastructure had not been completely penetrated. And critically, if they arrested Webb and he exercised his right to silence, which every psychological assessment suggested he would, they would prosecute one individual and lose the entire distribution network, the international buyer identities, and any evidence relevant to the counterintelligence dimension of the case. The argument prevailed. The task force petitioned the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court for authorization to deploy encrypted device surveillance against Webb's personal and work communications. The petition cited the documented financial pattern, the DLA tracking anomalies, and an additional piece of intelligence the NCIS counterintelligence unit had developed independently. A signals intercept from a partner agency referencing a U.S. naval supply source in Japan by operational category and geographic marker, matching the Hollow Keel profile precisely. Someone in the foreign intelligence collection environment already knew a supply pipeline existed at Yokosuka. The FISC approved the petition on December 9, 2025. Active surveillance of Webb's personal phone, work devices, and private email accounts went live within 48 hours. The first 2 weeks of surveillance returned more than the task force had anticipated. Webb was not operating with a small ring of 3 or 4 subordinates. He was running a structured network with distinct functional layers, each communicating through a separate encrypted channel. The NCIS technical unit spent 11 days fully decrypting and mapping the communication architecture. What emerged was an operational hierarchy, financial and procurement layer, Webb at the top, with 4 direct Navy subordinates handling ghost invoicing at the line item authorization level, a civilian contractor accountant managing payment routing through the authorized cost center accounts and international transfer chains. Total in this layer, 6 individuals. Physical diversion layer, 2 warehouse foremen, 1 overnight logistics coordinator, and a base transportation clerk. 4 individuals managing the physical movement of diverted units from facility receiving docks to the secondary warehouse and the onward shipment process to buyers. Technology and communications layer, a base communications technician who, NCIS investigators discovered, had installed a non-standard encrypted relay station in a maintenance room adjacent to Webb's office. The installation was logged in facility records as supplemental equipment testing apparatus. It had been authorized in writing by Webb in his capacity as a facility systems manager, a secondary administrative authority that, in practice, no one else reviewed. The relay routed auction platform traffic through the base's legitimate communications infrastructure in a way that masked its external destination. Acquisition and buyer management layer, 3 individuals operating outside Japan, 2 based in Southeast Asia, and 1 in Honolulu, managing the buyer network, verifying incoming payments, and coordinating final delivery logistics for completed auction transactions. Total identified network members as of the first week of January 2026, 16. By late February, as communication analysis expanded, the total had grown to 22. The 6 additional individuals were support personnel, supply technicians who had signed receiving certificates for diverted units without questioning the documentation, shift supervisors who had authorized overnight access to restricted warehouse bays on Webb's verbal direction without logging the access events as required by facility protocol, base administrative staff who had processed paperwork that moved physical assets between the primary facility and the secondary warehouse without triggering the inventory variance alerts that should have flagged the transfers. 3 of these support layer individuals, based on communication records and behavioral timeline analysis, appeared to have been initially unaware of what they were participating in. They had performed tasks, signing forms, clearing access, processing transfer documents, understanding them as routine administrative functions and nothing more. The communication records showed that as their exposure deepened to a point where Webb assessed them as security risks, he had approached each of them individually with an offer. 2 of them, the court affidavits indicate, received the offer under conditions investigators classified as coercive. Both eventually agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors. Their identities are protected in the public record. One detail that stuck with me throughout the case documentation: Webb maintained a handwritten ledger, paper, pen, in a manual cipher derived from a key stored separately on the auction server. 312 pages covering the full network membership, the complete transaction history, buyer identities, diverted unit serial numbers, payment amounts, and operational status of each network member. Webb was operating encrypted relay stations, rotating communication platforms, and a cryptographically secured Darknet auction market, and keeping his master record in longhand. The reasoning may have been simple: digital evidence can be remotely wiped. A physical ledger cannot. Webb apparently calculated that a paper document under his direct physical control was more secure than any device. He was right about that in principle. He could not have anticipated that agents would have the ledger in their hands within 90 seconds of entering his residence. The obstacle that shifted the investigation's timeline appeared on February 19, 2026. During routine review of surveillance intercepts, the NCIS technical unit noted that Webb had switched his primary communication platform without triggering the scheduled rotation protocol the network used for platform changes. Unscheduled. And he had simultaneously begun systematic deletion of archived communications, 14 months of records, targeting specific contacts and specific transaction threads. Not a mass wipe, a selective, methodical pruning of exposure footprint. Park raised it to the Joint Task Force within the hour. 3 possibilities. Webb had detected surveillance. Someone with access to Hollow Keel information had tipped him. Or the deletion was part of a security protocol she hadn't seen triggered before. A counter-leak assessment was initiated. 49 individuals with legitimate access to Operation Hollow Keel were assessed over 14 days. The review returned no definitive evidence of compromise. No definitive evidence and certainty are different standards. The task force made a technical decision within 72 hours. All active surveillance data would be mirrored in real time to a secondary storage system in a facility physically separate from the primary Hollow Keel infrastructure. Everything Webb transmitted from that point forward would be preserved in 2 independent locations, regardless of what he did to his own devices. The deletion continued for 11 days. Then it stopped. Webb returned to his established communication pattern with one modification. 2 of his Southeast Asian buyer contacts had been dropped from his direct communication channels and rerouted through an intermediary. The transactions continued. The network kept running. The question went to NCIS headquarters and FBI deputy director level. Move now, with the evidence as it stood, or continue to march and attempt to capture the full Darknet buyer pool before taking down the network? The answer came back on May 22, 2026. Move within 15 days. Accept the incomplete buyer identification. Take all 22 simultaneously. The raid was scheduled for June 4th. Unpopular opinion, and we'll say it plainly, the 6-month delay between first having prosecutable evidence on Webb in December and moving in June was the operationally correct decision. It produced 22 arrests instead of 1 and 89% recovery of the auction server data. But it also meant that Webb and 21 other individuals continued operating an active defense materials diversion scheme for 6 additional months after investigators had enough to stop it. More parts moved. More money changed hands. More classified hardware reached foreign buyers. Every operational decision has a cost structure. The prosecution will argue the result justified the delay. The ledger's unshipped entries from Bay 8 suggest the cost wasn't zero. The 68-day preparation period for the raid was itself an operation. Floor plans for the 12 warehouse bays had been obtained through the Classified Facility Assessment Request, filed under a separate case designator. Architectural analysis identified 3 bays with interior wall configurations that did not match official building records, spaces that were smaller inside than the external dimensions indicated. Thermal imaging conducted over 4 nights in April 2026. Using airborne platforms the public record describes only as surveillance assets, confirmed heat signatures inconsistent with empty industrial space in 3 of those bays. One showed a thermal profile consistent with active server hardware. Evidence packaging was pre-staged for the expected hardware types. Standard defense material recovery protocol required each unit to be individually photographed, serial number logged, and condition rated before evidence bagging. For the anticipated volume of hardware, that process required precision and sustained pace. The NCIS evidence teams brought documentation kits for 250 individual units. The digital forensics unit brought hardware write blockers capable of imaging drives at the point of seizure, and a secondary protocol: if any wipe sequence initiated before full imaging, disconnect power, preserve the physical hardware, and work from the drive rather than live data. That secondary protocol was not a contingency measure. Based on the communications intelligence about the network's security protocols, the task force assessed it would be needed. They were right. Put yourself in special agent in charge. Richard Yamamoto's position for a moment: 41 agents, 6 FBI tactical support personnel, 12 investigators, and 3 Japanese National Police Agency liaisons, standing in a secure briefing facility at 11 p.m. the night before the operation. You're about to execute the largest simultaneous breach operation ever conducted at a U.S. overseas naval installation. One of your 22 targets is already inside the warehouse complex, currently working an overnight shift, sitting adjacent to the server infrastructure you need to image before he can reach it. Your window is 90 seconds from first breach to containment of that specific individual. Every other arrest depends on all 15 points going simultaneously, so no one has time to trigger the network's alert protocol. What's your margin for error? 0. Yamamoto walked through each breach assignment a final time. Abort protocols, communication hierarchy, the 90-second Bay 4 window, and the exact sequence of actions required to meet it. What to do if a target reached for a device? What to do if a target resisted physically? What to do if the server wipe initiated before the forensics unit arrived? All warrants verified. Search warrants covering digital devices, financial records, and physical storage. Approved by a federal magistrate in Honolulu at 11:46 p.m. the prior evening. Yamamoto checked his watch. 4 hours and 47 minutes to breach. He told the team to rest if they could. 4:47 a.m., June 4th, 2026. 12 breach convoys moved simultaneously from staging positions at 4 separate locations across the base perimeter. Text-only coordination. No radio traffic that base communications monitoring could detect. The Japanese National Police Agency personnel had reached the main vehicle entrance guard booth by 4:43 a.m., positioned under the Mutual Legal Assistance Framework activated 3 weeks earlier. At 4:49 a.m., the roving dock security patrol completed its scheduled circuit and was redirected by JNP contacts using base security protocol language. Neither guard position generated an internal facility alert. Neither individual was arrested. They were redirected, not detained. Both were debriefed the following day. 7 minutes. That was the operational window between first breach and base shift change foot traffic. Bay 1 went at 4:51 a.m. Lead agent Carlos Reyes entered with a 4-person team. Bay lights activated automatically on motion sensors. Standard naval maintenance inventory visible in the front section. Pump assembly components, filter housings, bulk fastener kits in labeled containers. Everything routine. Everything visible from the doorway. Reyes moved past the 4th row of shelving. The false wall ran the full width of the bay, floor to ceiling. Constructed from standard facility-grade metal paneling. The color matched the existing bay walls without visible variation. Bolt patterns consistent with legitimate structural installation. Seams aligned with the building support members. An inspector performing a scheduled walkthrough would have needed architectural drawings and a tape measure to identify it as non-standard. The access point was a recessed latch mechanism concealed in a panel seam. Reyes opened it. Pallets, floor to ceiling, approximately 9 meters wide by 6 meters deep. 15 pallets, each stacked with shrink-wrapped units, carrying barcodes listing DLA inventory codes for maintenance consumables. Filter media, lubricants, sealant compound kits, the kind of labeling that generated no secondary attention from anyone moving through the space. The first evidence technician cut the shrink film on the nearest unit. Inside AN/SPY-1-D radar subassembly. Factory packaging, intact, unbroken seal. Serial number on the manufacturer's label. Delta-3-7-0-9. The technician ran it through the mobile DLA query terminal brought in for the operation. No result. Bay 2 breached at 4:52 a.m., turbine diagnostic processors, and additional radar modules. 23 units on 4 pallets, all factory packaged. None with DLA registration. Bay 3 at 4:52 a.m. 47 units of shipboard communications encryption hardware. Classification marking on the original manufacturer packaging, confidential. Inside the false wall, every unit had been repackaged in plain commercial shrink film. The original markings had been cleanly removed. Adhesive residue on the external surfaces of several units indicated the labels had been peeled rather than abraded, leaving no visible defacement on the underlying hardware. Someone had been preparing this cache for export. Confidential classification markings, visible on packaging, generate questions at port inspections. Removing them prior to shipping was preparation, not afterthought. Bay 4 went at 4:53 a.m. Warehouse Foreman Specialist Second Class Jason Tran was seated at a workstation in the far left corner of the bay, adjacent to a commercial server rack on a mobile equipment frame with an independent power supply. The rack was running, the workstation display showed an auction management dashboard, multiple active listing windows, column displays of bid histories, a pending transaction queue with countdown timers on 6 active items. The Darknet auction market was live, running a transaction cycle at 4:53 a.m. Special Agent Maria Suarez announced federal agents and instructed Tran to step away from the workstation. Tran stood, turned, assessed the situation. The after-action report describes a pause of approximately 2 to 3 seconds. Then he placed both hands flat on the workstation surface and pressed a key sequence. The server rack's operational tone changed. FBI digital forensics agent Paul Kowalski was 8 steps from the rack. He crossed in approximately 4 seconds, pulled the primary power feed manually, and simultaneously inserted a right-blocking device into the rack's secondary data port. Total elapsed time between wipe initiation and power disconnection, approximately 6 seconds. The forensics report delivered June 9th, 2026 confirmed 11% of the primary drive had been overwritten before disconnection. The remaining 89% was intact and recoverable. The buyer database, transaction records spanning 31 months, active listing inventory, and a full communication log between the auction platform and its external access nodes were all recoverable. Tran was placed in handcuffs. He said nothing during processing, transport, and his initial appearance before a magistrate judge in Yokosuka, at which point his attorney arrived and advised continued silence. Across the dock complex, the other 11 warehouse breaches were running in parallel. Bay 5 contains 62 turbine diagnostic processors and a secondary financial routing terminal, not an auction platform, but a payment management interface. The forensics unit found it still logged into a live session showing 3 pending wire transfers in progress to accounts in Singapore and the Cayman Islands. Combined pending transfer value, $1.4 million. The transfers were flagged and blocked through immediate coordination with U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network before clearing. Bay 8 yielded the largest single cache recovered in the operation. 23 Aegis radar subassemblies on 6 pallets in original Department of Defense transfer packaging with DoD shipping documentation attached. The shipping documentation listed a freight forwarding company in Singapore as destination. The expected shipping date on the documentation, June 9th, 2026. 5 days after the raid, the network had a confirmed outbound shipment in preparation, packaged, documented, ready. The remaining warehouse bays yielded a combination of additional hardware and operational infrastructure, additional server units, financial record archives, encrypted drives, and physical shipping logistics documentation, tracing the movement of units between the secondary warehouse and multiple freight forwarding intermediaries across the prior 18 months. The false utility walls appeared in 8 of the 12 bays, varying in scale and construction quality. The oldest appeared, based on construction methods and material oxidation, to have been built approximately 4 years prior. The most recent showed construction characteristics consistent with the prior 6 months. They had been building more storage space as the inventory grew. The 3 residential breaches ran simultaneously with the warehouse operation. Webb's residence, a 2-bedroom officer housing unit inside the gated base compound, was entered at 4:52 a.m. Webb was in the 2nd bedroom, awake, dressed in civilian clothes, seated at a table with no device in reach. His hands were visible and empty. He made no attempt to reach any phone or computer when the agents announced themselves. He acknowledged his name for the arresting agents. He said nothing else. The primary residence search yielded 4 encrypted external drives, 2 mobile phones and a tablet, printed financial records spanning 16 months, and behind a false panel in the utility closet's interior wall, the ledger. 312 pages of handwritten ciphertext on the standard-issue government notepad paper, organized into dated sections and indexed with margin notations in a secondary color of ink. The cipher key was not in the residence. It was recovered from an encrypted partition on the auction server, accessed by the forensics unit 3 days after the raid. When decrypted, the ledger mapped the complete 5-year operational history of the network. Every diverted part, cataloged by serial number, diversion date, storage location, auction listing date, buyer designator, sale price, and payment confirmation. Every ghost billing transaction with the corresponding authorization number, payment routing path, and deposit destination. Every network member identified by a 2-letter operational designator with annotations indicating their role, their recruitment date, their compensation structure, and for 3 members, a notation that the investigators read as indicating the individuals were no longer active and their status was resolved. What resolved means in this context has not been established in the public record. The ledger also listed 3 designators for which the analyst had no corresponding identity as of the date of the indictment. 3 network members who have not been identified, not been charged, and not been located. By 5:23 a.m. on June 4th, 2026, all 22 listed arrest warrants had been confirmed executed. The operation had taken 32 minutes. The federal indictment unsealed on June 6th. 2026 names Marcus Webb as primary defendant on charges, including wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, theft of government property exceeding $100,000, racketeering in violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, unauthorized export of defense articles in violation of the Arms Export Control Act, and conspiracy to receive stolen property. Federal sentencing guidelines applied across all counts produce a maximum exposure exceeding 4 decades of federal custody. The 20 additional defendants face charges ranging across conspiracy, theft of government property, receipt of stolen defense materials, and obstruction of justice. The 2 civilian acquisition managers, arrested in coordinated operations conducted by Malaysian authorities under the Mutual Legal Assistance Framework the previous morning, face extradition proceedings before the Malaysian High Court expected to extend through at least the end of 2026. If you've followed federal defense procurement cases before, subscribe. The sentencing phase of prosecutions like this one rarely matches the charge exposure. We'll cover the trial and sentencing as they develop, and this case has a second act in the sealed record. The financial picture as of the indictment date: approximately $64.8 million in physical hardware recovered from the warehouse complex and secondary storage locations. $12 million in identified financial assets frozen through DOJ asset forfeiture proceedings filed in the Eastern District of Virginia. The remaining gap, estimated at $19.4 million in fraudulent billing proceeds still distributed through the International Shell Company network, is the subject of active recovery through Interpol's Financial Crime Liaison Office and Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. The 2 individuals who entered the network under coercive circumstances, referenced in the affidavits as having been approached by Webb after their involuntary exposure became a security risk, have entered cooperation agreements with federal prosecutors. Their identities are protected in public filings. Their testimony is expected to form the evidentiary backbone of the prosecution's case against the 8 support layer defendants. The hardest part of this case is what sits behind the sealed annex. That's where the real questions are. The counterintelligence portion of Operation Hollow Keel, filed as a sealed annex to the investigation record and not accessible in any public document, concerns the 2 communication strings escalated to the Defense Intelligence Agency during the surveillance phase. Those strings referenced recipients by operational designators that did not correspond to any of the 22 individuals named in the criminal indictment. The Senate Armed Services Committee has been briefed on the content of those strings in closed session. What that briefing contained has not been disclosed. The sealed probe is examining whether 2 flag rank officers, senior to Webb in the Yokosuka command structure, had advanced knowledge of the supply chain diversion operation. Not participation, knowledge. The distinction carries legal weight. Knowledge of an ongoing defense material theft without reporting it constitutes a violation of federal reporting obligations under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and potential criminal exposure under federal statute. The prosecutor's decision not to include those individuals in the June 6 filing may reflect insufficient evidence meeting the criminal standard. It may reflect the requirements of an ongoing counterintelligence investigation that legally takes precedence. Both interpretations are consistent with what is publicly known. What is not consistent with either interpretation is a clean resolution. 3 unidentified designators in the ledger. 2 unnamed recipients in the counterintelligence communication strings. 2 flag rank officers whose awareness is under sealed investigation. The June 6th indictment covers 22 defendants. It does not close every question the Operation Hollow Keel record raises. The most surprising thing about this case, when you step back from the dollar figures, is not the scale. It's that the entry point was a standard cross-reference check that Herrick performed using data access she already had, querying a database that had been available to authorized users for years on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The DLA tracking system had the information. The capability to check it existed. No one had been checking it. 3 commanding officers, 5 years. 1 junior analyst working an afternoon shift who decided to pull a second serial number when the first one didn't make sense. The $31.4 million in ghost billing payments is subject to forfeiture proceedings. The $64.8 million in recovered hardware will undergo classification review before any re-entry into DoD supply chains. Some categories may be unserviceable for that purpose depending on whether they were accessed or copied during the period they were in unauthorized custody. The remaining $32 million in estimated unrecovered material value has no current public accounting. Parts that were auctioned, shipped, delivered to buyers who have not been publicly identified, defense-grade systems components, some carrying confidential classification, now in the possession of foreign acquisition entities whose ultimate principles remain under intelligence investigation. The pipeline to them is gone. The product already delivered is not recoverable through a federal indictment. Will this happen again? At Yokosuka, the audit protocols have already been restructured, the facility command has been reconstituted, and physical infrastructure has been rebuilt. At Yokosuka specifically, the access conditions that allowed this scheme to operate for 5 years no longer exist. But those access conditions, single authority control over high-value requisition chains, limited DLA cross-referencing in practice despite being available in theory, command structures that rely on authorized signatories to self-audit, those conditions are not unique to Yokosuka. NCIS has confirmed that Operation Hollow Keel has prompted a facility-level review at major Pacific region naval installations. It has not confirmed what those reviews have found. Comment yes if you think the review surfaces additional problems at other facilities. Comment no if you think Yokosuka was structurally unique. We read every response. The 22 defendants will face federal trial in the Eastern District of Virginia, the standard jurisdiction for national security prosecutions of this category. Pre-trial motions are expected to run through the first quarter of 2027. Webb's defense team has indicated a challenge to the admissibility of the FISC-authorized surveillance materials, an argument that has failed in comparable espionage-adjacent prosecutions, but will consume substantial court time regardless. Dana Herrick, the DFAS logistics analyst whose anomaly report started all of this, is not named in any public court filing. She appears in the affidavits only as a DFAS specialist. Her October 14th cross-reference check, the one that identified the radar module installed twice, the one that found 11 unregistered components on a Tuesday afternoon, is described in the prosecution's brief as the initial predicate for the NCIS referral that opened Operation Hollow Keel. That is all the public record says about her. 3 unidentified network members in a handwritten ledger remain at large. The hardware in federal custody waits for classification review. The buyers in Southeast Asia have not been publicly identified, and somewhere in the sealed annex of Operation Hollow Keel, 2 names that did not appear in the June 6th indictment are waiting for a different kind of proceeding, one that if it comes will not be announced in a press release. The network is dismantled. The demand that made it profitable still exists.